All right, guys, I'm going to attempt to explain why Greece is in trouble and why it matters to you guys. Basically, Greece has been living beyond its means in recent years, and its rising level of debt has placed a huge strain on the country's economy. Does that sound familiar? What happened was the Greek government borrowed heavily and went on something of a spending spree after it adopted the euro as its form of currency in 2002 when it replaced the drachma. Public spending soared and public sector wages practically doubled in the past decade. However, as the money flowed out of the government's coffers, tax income was hit. And the reason is because of widespread tax evasion in that nation. And if you want to read more about the psychology and sociology of Greeks and Greece and why there's such widespread corruption, there's a great book called Boomerang that you can get at the bookstore on the Sovereign Alliance. When the global financial downturn hit, they were really ill prepared to cope. They were given $155 billion of bailout loans to help it get through the crisis, and now has earmarked to receive another $155 billion. But what's happened is that's not enough. Greece received its original bailout in May of 2010. The reason that it'd be bailed out was that it had become too expensive for it to borrow money commercially. It had debts that needed to be paid, and as it couldn't afford to borrow money from financial markets to pay them, it turned to the EU and the IMF. The idea was to give Greece time to sort out its economy so the cost for it to borrow money commercially would come down. But of course, that didn't happen. Indeed, the rating agency S&P recently decided that Greece was the least credit-worthy country that it monitors. As a result, Greece lost a lot of its debt. Greece has a lot of debt that needs to be paid, but it cannot afford to borrow commercially and does not have enough money from the first bailout to pay them. So despite the bailouts, many people think Greece will default, which it obviously will. They certainly do. They think this in financial markets, which seem to have accepted that Greece is heading for an orderly default, which I believe there's no such thing as. In July, Eurozone leaders proposed a plan that would see private lenders to Greece writing off 20% of the money they originally lent, basically just forgiving 20% of the loan. Whereas the latest plan, they're talking about writing off 50% of the loan. What continues to worry the market, however, is fear of a disorderly default, which is going to happen, and the domino effect that it might have within the Eurozone. This is what we call systemic, because they're all tied together, because they all invest in each other's bonds, and they all borrow from Peter to pay Paul. They're all interconnected, hence the worry. So we have major Eurozone governments have been criticized for no lack of political leadership, and there have been signs of division actually within the ECB for the first time ever, along with our own Federal Reserve. The concern in the market is that the Eurozone's political structures do not have the authority to deal with the magnitude of the economic problems. What that basically means is no one's got any money. We can't help them out because we don't have any money. We're borrowing from China. And it's not yet clear if the latest deal will go far enough to reassure investors for long. It won't. It's all temporary. So could the crisis spread? The aim is at the last Greek bailout, as with the first bailout, is to contain the crisis. Note the word contagion is now a big word in finance. The bailouts of Portugal and the Irish Republic were designed to tide both countries over until they could borrow commercially again, just as was hoped for Greece. If that hasn't been possible in Greece, investors may question whether the same solution will work for the other two bailout recipients. There are also concerns about the situation in Italy and Spain, both of which have seen their borrowing costs rise. The Spanish and Italian economies are far bigger than those of Greece. Portugal and the Irish Republic and the European Union would struggle to bail them out if that became necessary, which it will. So what will happen if Greece defaults? Well, European banks are big holders of Greece debt. perhaps 50 to 60 billion dollars outstanding. An orderly default could mean a substantial part of this debt being rescheduled so that repayments are pushed back decades. A disorderly default could mean much of the debt not being repaid ever, which is eventually going to be the case. Either way, it'd be extremely painful for the banks and the bondholders and the countries and the Eurozone and the United States. Now, what's more, Greek banks are exposed to the sovereign debts of their country. They would need new capital, and it's likely some would need nationalizing. A crisis of confidence would spark a run on the banks as people withdrew their money, making the problem worse. This is history repeating itself. That confidence crisis may spread to overseas banks, which could stop lending until the full extent of a default was known. It might be a repeat of the credit crunch that pushed European and the US into a recession 3 years ago. What does that mean for the Eurozone? Well, a Greek exit is seen by some as inevitable if the country defaulted. The big question would be then, what about other heavily indebted nations? Hence, here comes the domino effect. If Greece can force a haircut on its creditors, then why not Portugal or the Republic of Ireland? Do you see where I'm getting at? The people that loan them money, they're all going to be out of luck. The political and economic structures that have bound the 17-nation bloc together would begin to unravel. You would see the unraveling of the Eurozone. Now, German public opinion is already tiring of the government's lead role in bailing out the Eurozone in a bid to hold the blocs together. What does all this mean to the UK? Basically, they're all in trouble because the UK has a ton of money invested in Greek and would lose a lot of its money, and then hence they would have trouble borrowing money. It's really an indirect effect of Greece default. Basically, that explains why we're all screwed, because we have a systemic problem. What happens is it creates a contagion. Greece is just the beginning. Then comes Italy, then comes Spain, then comes France. Iceland's already in trouble. Ireland is already in trouble. Germany can't continue to repay them back, and we're all connected to them. So here's a little secret for you. They're out in China right now begging for money. And that hopefully can explain the update on Greece. It's coming, it's happening, there's nothing you can do about it, and hence inflation and hyperinflation is on the way. So I hope you're at least not invested in anything that has to do with European bonds, and I hope that you are listening to the experts who have seen this coming for 20 years.